All right, guys, welcome back to How to Build a Blog with Laravel. This is part 12 and a half. That's right, it's another half episode. And the reason I'm doing a half episode is because these are kind of optional tutorials that you may not need if you're just focusing on the Laravel project and you just want to learn Laravel, but it can be really useful for enhancing your applications, all right? So today's half episode is about adding JavaScript form validation to our forms in Laravel, okay? So that's what we're going to be doing here. In the last video, I talked about how to set up server-side validation, and I told you to ensure that you always have server-side validation and only use JavaScript as a nice to have to improve the customer experience, but don't ever rely on it, okay? You need to still have that server-side validation, but I'm gonna show you now how to set up JavaScript validation if that's something you wanna do. It enhances the application in a lot of ways, so let's go ahead and get started. In order to get started with JavaScript form validation, there are a lot of ways that you can do it. One way is obviously to build it yourself. It's actually not that hard to build it yourself, especially with the help of Jquery. I've done that before in the past, and a lot of times I thought that was kind of the easiest way. A lot of form validation libraries for JavaScript are like really confusing to use and bloated. I haven't had a lot of good success with them, and so I've often just found myself building them myself, basic form validation for what I needed. However, I've discovered in the last year or so, I've fallen in love with Parsley, which is a form validation library for JavaScript. It runs off Jquery, and it is so easy to use and set up. So let me show you how to get that set up because you guys are going to fall in love with it. Before we get started, I want to go over to the documentation of Parsley. I've obviously got the link for this in the description, so go ahead and click that if you're interested. That'll take you here to parsleyjs.org, and this is where I'm at, and we'll be focusing on this through the rest of the video. If we click on the documentation, you can see here at the very beginning that I'm not crazy. Everything I told you in the last video is true, that you need to have that server-side validation. Here it says Parsley is a JavaScript form validation library, and it provides users with feedback on their form before sending it to your server. That's the difference between the client-side validation and what we did last video, which is the server-side validation. This is going to check it before it goes to the server, and our server-side validation obviously checks it after it arrived at the server. Now, why would you want to do the JavaScript validation? Well, aside from improving the customer or the user experience, it does some of these things they mention here. It can save you bandwidth because you're not doing all these HTML requests, HTTP requests. All of this fixing is happening on the client side and not requiring server bandwidth. It decreases your server load because validation can sometimes be very heavy on the server. And then also it saves time for your users because they're not doing these HTTP requests back and getting redirected and back and so forth. Okay, so that's why we do. That's why we're doing this here today. Now, it does also say right after here, JavaScript form validation is not necessary, okay? And if used, it does not, and they bolded this because of how important it is. So I want you to reiterate how important it is because I've been saying it for a while and I'm not crazy. It does not replace strong backend server validation, okay? Make sure you have that before we continue. I also want to show you before we start, under UI UX over here on the side, if we click that, it tells you a little bit about what I love about Parsley, which is that it does a lot of the things that honestly I probably wouldn't bother to do if I was creating a JavaScript validation library myself really quick for the project. It starts with minimum character validation. What this means is basically if you've only typed one character, it's not going to try to validate that form yet. In fact, it also waits until you've had at least one opportunity to completely fill out the form first before it tries to run, which is really nice. You're not bombarding your users with validation requests when they might just not have finished their typing in something into the field. It also only focuses on one error at a time. This is nice because the users don't see all these errors at once. They just focus on one error, they fix that error, and then it shows them the next one. It also has quick error removal, which gives users instant feedback when they succeed in validating. As soon as they type something incorrectly, it turns green and gives them immediate feedback. And last is controlling focus on the error. This is just basically like if they submit the form, it pulls focus or pulls the cursor and the input into the field that has the error. Okay, so that makes it really convenient as well. So anyway, all these things are customizable, but it comes out of the box with everything, which is awesome. Okay, so that's kind of where we're at right now. Now we need to go ahead and get started. So let's come back up here to the top and click on download. Now there's two things we need to do. First of all, you need to obviously download the JavaScript. So let's go ahead and do that real fast. We can just go ahead and install this parsley.min.js. It's just right here at the bottom. And this is only 11 kilobytes. We're not modifying the JavaScript, so we can just use the one that's minified. It saves you about half. So this is 21 kilobytes, and this is only 11. So to save it, we're just going to go ahead and right-click. And on Mac, you can do Save Link As. I think on Windows, it's Download File or something like that. Click Save Link As. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this directly into our Laravel project, okay? We're going to save it into our Laravel project, and then I'm going to show you how to load it in the Laravel project. Now, my Laravel project is under Sites and then Blog. And then under Blog here, this is our project folder. You're going to want to go into the public folder, and then you need to create a new folder called JS. Okay, this is where we're going to save all of our JavaScript. Under the public folder in our project, public, and then we're just going to create a folder for JavaScript, and I'm going to call it JS. Click Create, and then you can see here it's called parsley.min.js. Just go ahead and save it and inside that folder. Save. Perfect. So it's in our project right now. And then the next thing we need to do, I said there were two things we need to do to get started. First is the JavaScript, and the second is the CSS. Now you can write your own, in fact, this is probably what I'd encourage you to do, is write your own CSS for when you have these, for this validation. It's pretty easy. However, to save time, I'm going to use the CSS they've already written for us. So let's go ahead and download that as well. I think if you come over to documentation and scroll down past installation, you can see here that it tells you that we need to install Jquery, Parsley, and then we add this to our form, and then down here it tells you that you can download the CSS if you need it. They kind of discourage you from doing that. They think you should do it yourself. But again, to save time, we're going to use the built-in one. Okay, so here's the Parsley CSS. Once again, right-click, Save Link As. We're going to do the same thing we did before, but instead of saving it in the JavaScript folder, we're going to create a CSS folder. Okay, so I'm going to go create a new folder, CSS, and now we're going to call it parsley.css. Okay, go ahead and save that. Perfect. Now we should have both the CSS and the JavaScript in our project. Let's head on over to our project file. This is right where we left off in episode 12. We were doing the store function, right? And we did our validation right here, the server-side validation. We can actually close this controller. We don't need it. And what we're going to want is we're just going to want to focus on the in the public folder. We've got our CS, parsley.css, and you can see we've got some of those set up here. And then in our JavaScript, we've got the JavaScript library. Now, the first thing we need to do, obviously, is load both the CSS and the JavaScript. Now, there's a couple ways to do that. If we go over to our views, under Resources and Views, we could obviously install it directly in our main file, right? In the main template, and then it would be loaded into every single page in our project. That seems like a good way to go. Except that we don't really need to bloat this down because we're not using form validation on every single page, only on a few of them. So I'm going to go ahead and just do it on a page-by-page basis. But if you wanted to do it on every page, you could do it here. In the case of the JavaScript, you would just add it into this partial here. You would go into the partial, add it in the JavaScript, and then you could also do it for the style sheet. We have a partial for our style sheets, and you would just add it in there. Now, because we're doing it on the page-by-page basis, if you remember, we created these other sections called scripts, which load after the other scripts have loaded. So that allows us kind of better control over adding new scripts. And then we can control it on a page-by-page basis. So we have the normal JavaScripts that load on every page. And then if we create a section called scripts, we can also load additional stuff on the pages that we need to. So that's what we're going to do. So we have one called scripts, and if we go into partials and under head, you can see we have another one called style sheets, okay? So style sheets are for CSS, and then we wrote scripts for JavaScript. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up our the page that we want to add form validation to, and that's going to be the create.blade.php under posts, right? It's the one we just made in a video 2 videos ago. So we opened up this form, and we had kind of this validation right here. Now the one thing we want to do is just add our CSS at the top and our JavaScript at the bottom. So what we can do is just create under title, we can create a new section and call it style sheets. All right, and then create an end section. And then in the middle here, we can just add the location for our CSS. Easy enough. What we're going to do is we're going to actually execute raw code. So we're going to do the curly brace with the 2 exclamation points, just like that. And then after that, we're going to use a helper that we actually installed in the last video, or no, 2 videos ago when we did the forms. Remember when we went to Laravel Collective and installed the form helpers? We also installed HTML helpers. If you remember creating 2 aliases, one for HTML and one for forms. So we're going to use the HTML helpers this time. So go ahead and type HTML, and do make sure when you type HTML that it should be, if you did it correctly when you made the aliases, you should have just a capital H and then lowercase TML, okay? It's not all caps HTML. So it's just capital H and then TML. And then you can write styles, I believe it is. We're about to find out. I'm trying to remember this. So you're going to write styles, and then the location of your styles, which is css/parsley.css. Okay. Okay. Actually, I'm pretty sure this is just singular style. That's the convention that Laravel uses. So HTML style, and then just do css/parsley.css. Okay, and that'll go into our public folder, wherever that is, public, and then into CSS, and then it will do it'll load this file. Okay, so that should finish up our style sheets section. At the bottom of this section, let's create another section and call it scripts. This is again for our JavaScript and section, okay. And then we're going to go ahead and do the exact same thing, but this time we're going to do script instead of style. So we're going to do script, and then we just do js/parsley.min.js, just typing out the file that we've already created. Let's go ahead and make sure those work. So save the file, come back over to your here to your web page. Make sure you have your server running. You can actually see here that it's loading CSS partially and JS. So that's a good sign. This is what we weren't getting before. Okay, so it's loading these files. That tells you right now that it's loading. You can also double check by just going to inspect element, and you should be able to see, well, yeah, you can do it in here. It's just a little harder because you got to unfold all these. So we've got this is our bootstrap up here, and then we're loading our CSS. And if we go down to the bottom, we should be able to find the JavaScript. Here's the JavaScript. It says js/parsley.min.js. If you go to your console, you won't get any errors. That's a good sign. And then if you go to sources, you should be able to find the files in here. You can see it's loading the JavaScript and it loads the CSS. All of those are good signs that it's loaded and it's good to go. So lots of ways to tell that something's loaded. Okay. Now that we know it's loading, we can go ahead and implement the validation. So the way we would implement validation, let's actually head over to the documentation to take a look at it. Okay, so it says how to install it. You obviously, it relies on Jquery, which means we need to make sure we load Jquery first, which we did. After Jquery, we need to load Parsley, so we did that. We just checked that. Now the next thing we need to do is bind our form by typing data partially validate in the form. Okay, so that needs to be part of the form tag. All right, so let's go ahead and start that. That's really easy. What we need to do is just go over to our page here, and in our form, we just want to pass a new value into this array. So we already have route, and we set route to post.store, and that's good. And just add another item to the array, and we're going to do data parsley validate. Okay, and then you need to set that equal to just a blank string. Don't set it to true, it won't work. Don't set it to null, it just won't show up. You need to set it to a blank, an empty string. Okay, let's come back over here to the documentation and let's take a look at how this works. So we can actually scroll down under here and click usage. And let's see. I'm trying to see where the easy part is. Okay, let's come down here to validators. This is all you need to know. So basically what we need to do is we can, just like how we did before, we found our list of the validation rules. We can do the same thing here. And we just find the validation rules and we can add it to either the HTML, or if we're actually initializing it through JavaScript, which we're not doing, then you could also add it as an option in the JavaScript. Okay, we're not doing that. We're just going to do it in the HTML. So we want to find these HTML5 items, and then you can just add them directly in the HTML. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. You could add data partially required, or make it set it to true. That's one way to work it with it. Or you could just set it to required in the tag. So either of those will work. It'll tell Parsley that this field is required. Let's go ahead and do that right now. Let's come over here in our text field under title. Let's in the array, let's just set another item required, and you just set that to a blank string. Okay, and that'll just set it to be required. Let's go ahead and do the same thing with body. So we're gonna set required and set that to a blank string. Let's go ahead and save that. Come back over to our project, reload, and you should be able to just submit the form and see if the errors work. So here you can see that it obviously worked. We're getting errors here, but as soon as we start adding, it turns green. So that's a good sign. And as soon as we start adding something, it turns green. So it's really, really easy to work with. We already have form validation, guys. Although we do also want to check to make sure that the title is less than 255 characters, because that's something we have in the other form as well. So in the server-side validation. So if we come back over to our documentation, we can see if there's less. Here it is, min length. It validates that the length of a string is at least as long as the given length. Oh, so we want max length. So it determines that a string is not longer than the given limit. You can see how it works here. Max length equals, then you just set it to however many characters it works. Once again, really easy. You guys are picking up on this, hopefully. Let's come over to our project and let's create another item in the title. And you can just set max length. I'm getting that from here. So max length equals 6. We want 255. So max length, and then just set that equal to 255. Go ahead and save, and let's go ahead and refresh. Great, so we should have, if we type something that's over 300 characters, let's just type a whole bunch of stuff. I don't even know. This is 255 characters is actually quite a bit. I'm just jumbling a whole bunch of stuff here. It looks like it just stops you at 255. It does. It stops you at 255, which is kind of nice. So it doesn't even let you type more than 255. So that's great. So we've got that set up and we've got our form validation working. So now all you got to do going forward, if you want to add form validation to a page on your a page in your project, you just need to make sure to load the JavaScript and the CSS, and then you could, and then you just add to the form. You're just going to add this data partially validate, and then it will automatically validate it based on the attributes you put in each input. Okay. You can also see that when you submit that, it actually blocks you from submitting it. This is a real post. This is where, and as soon as we do it, you can see it turns green and it works. Okay, so you can see earlier that I was not able to submit the form. Let's go ahead and try that again. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to cut this out. You can see it instantly turns red. that indicate that there's an error. It tells you a value is required. If we click create post, it's not going to let us create the post. It doesn't even do a refresh. It just doesn't let us do it, which is what we want. We're saving bandwidth and server load and time. It tells us it's required. As soon as we submit it and we click create post, you can see it submitted it to the database. Now we're on ID number 3. Okay, so that's how JavaScript works, guys. JavaScript form validation. I highly recommend you play with Parsley. It's super easy way to go. There's a lot more you can do. Just read the documentation. This isn't intended to be a full Parsley tutorial. It's really just to kind of show you what we would do basically as the next steps if we were working on this project together. Okay, so I'll see you guys in the next video.